Pokemon is one of the most iconic names in all of pop culture and really doesn't need an introduction. We got trainers, Pikachu, Pokeballs, Pokemon Go to the polls, and all that madness can be identified at a glance, even by the most out-of-touch confused parents. There's one part of Pokemon that truly captures people's attention. A burning desire in their hearts that have them put hours upon hours into the game, learning every nook and cranny of the game, gaining an absolutely encyclopedic level of knowledge. A desire that can easily be summed up in one of the first spoken words heard in the world of Pokemon. Being the very best, like no one ever was. Yes, today we are talking about the world of competitive Pokemon, the art of truly becoming the very best by bringing your Pokemon into battle against the rest of the world. And let me tell you guys something. Competitive Pokemon is absolutely whack. Let's talk about it. Not only is the process for even putting the pieces together to maybe have a chance at becoming the very best incredibly convoluted to the point that someone just picking up the game couldn't even fathom where to begin, but to be completely honest, the game wasn't really made to be competitive. That sounds kind of contradictory to the fact that VGC is still alive and well, so let's dive into what the heck I'm talking about here. Let me start by saying that I absolutely adore the competitive Pokemon scene. You can catch me watching Pachirisu catching that Draco Meteor once a month. Not to mention I play Showdown all the time. Pokemon as a competitive game gives players a super high skill ceiling, and there's a ton of fun to using the Pokemon battle system in a variety of different ways. Plus, a lot of the negatives I'll be mentioning aren't inherently bad, and I'll likely even include reasons why they still work within the context of Pokemon. In fact, the main inspiration for this video is that I've started to work on a game heavily inspired by competitive Pokemon, and a lot of what you're about to hear are notes I've taken to apply to my own game, which I'll probably keep you guys posted on it in a little dev diary video series if you all are interested. Hopefully I can push it through to the end. Alright, now that I've gotten my defenses out of the way, let's talk about some of the aspects of competitive Pokemon for anyone watching who isn't quite in the know. Playing any game competitively is all about optimization. In a fighting game, that means optimizing your inputs, timing, reactions, and in a shooter, it means optimizing aim, psychology, reactions, all that jazz. Competitive Pokemon isn't so much reaction-based as it's a turn-based strategy game. So a large part of optimizing things is to optimize your team and think out every single move you're gonna make. Now, Pokemon has a lot of fun mechanics that basically ensure that no Pokemon is exactly the same. Even if you have 2 Pachirisus or 2 Charizards, they're not going to be exactly the same. You know, to help create that sort of variety, with stuff like individual values, which are essentially like genes, effort values, which slightly boost certain stats depending on which Pokemon you fight as you play the game, and natures, which can boost one stat while decreasing another. All of these are, all in all, very minor, but if you want to be the very best, you have to optimize these things. Hardcore. Selectively breeding to ensure the IVs are in top shape, breeding even more to get the right nature, and to ensure it's learned any egg moves it's supposed to know, then taking note of every single fight your Pokemon is a part of to ensure the correct EVs. It's a lot of work. Now fortunately, the more recent games have made it a little easier to track stuff like this, giving ways to ensure the correct nature by giving someone an Everstone while breeding, IVs can more easily transmit by holding the Destiny Knot, and Super Training from X and Y and the Pokepelago from Sun and Moon make EV training a little bit easier. It's still pretty grindy. Even then, people still enjoy it, and I'm not one to stop their dedication. Like I said, this ain't bashing on competitive Pokemon, I love it! Especially because Pokemon Showdown exists. For those more impatient, such as myself, there's also Pokemon Showdown, an online Pokemon simulator where you can set up a team from the ground up, including all the IVs, EVs, and natures you need in just a minute or two. Now that we're all on the same page, let's talk about the thing I said earlier about competitive Pokemon being absolutely whack. Let's start with the big point first. This is probably the biggest elephant in the room, or rather the biggest Mega Sky Dragon in the room. Game Freak has been notorious for having their games be pretty unbalanced. If you want a good example of the level of balance that Pokemon in itself has, look no further than the way tiers are organized in Pokemon Showdown and by Smogon, the competitive Pokemon community that I will be greatly complimenting throughout this video. See, since there are over 800 Pokemon to be balanced and stuff, it's not going to be an easy task. So Smogon took it upon themselves to make sure that every single Pokemon got played in some form or another by making different tiers. In competitive Pokemon from Smogon, you have Ubers, which are pretty much the banned ones, Overused, the most played category, Underused, Rarely Used, Never Used, PU, and Little Cup. Each of these fan-made tiers hold their own metagame, acting as sort of like, the tier list, like you'd see in a fighting game, only each individual tier has its own individual metagame, so you can't bring Mega Metagross into a lower tiered match because Mega Metagross would easily wipe the floor with Luminions and Rapidashes, even with that type advantage. Now, the meta being able to evolve and give us multiple competitive tiers is pretty awesome, and is one of my favorite aspects of competitive Pokemon. After all, like I said, balancing 807 Pokemon is likely no easy task. But at the same time, balancing is probably even harder when you introduce Mega Rayquaza, a Pokemon that was so incredibly powerful that when it was introduced in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, Smogon created the Anything Goes tier, banning Mega Rayquaza from Ubers, which was a tier relegated to Pokemon too powerful for usual competitive play. Yeah, Mega Rayquaza was busted. And even without the introduction of legendaries, no one would really call Pokemon balanced, with high-level teams consisting of the same similar Pokemon most of the time. If you want an example, look no further than the VGC, the Pokemon Official Tournaments. The top 8 teams each have 6 different Pokemon, meaning that at best we see 48 different Pokemon represented in these events. The most recent World Championships in 2018 gave us a top 8 consisting of 23 different Pokemon. And more egregiously is the infamous 2015 World Championships, where there were only 15 different Pokemon. Man, just look at that variety. And this wouldn't be that much of a bummer for most spectators if, I don't know, there weren't 680 different Pokemon to choose from at the time. Now, this is a little bit unfair of a call to make, being just some lowly YouTuber who thinks he can take on the gargantuan task of balancing these 680 Pokemon, especially because that's an inaccurate number, and also because it's Pokemon. Which leads me to my next segment, which will be used in balance talking about and also some of the future things. Let's talk about it right now! In the space of competitive games and esports, there is not a single game out there nearly like competitive Pokemon. Unlike any other game you see with a competitive scene, Pokemon was not made to be a competitive game at a high level. Yes, it has a very deep battle system, and they put in a way to battle your friends and be the very best, but unlike Super Smash Bros. Or Street Fighter or Hearthstone or League, the game isn't built around this battle system. Pokemon has always, from the very beginning, been an RPG adventure. It's always been a game where you start with a Pokemon you like, you travel across the land, you catch new Pokemon, and you see yourself grow into a Pokemon Master. And the thing is, a game where you grow and a game with competitive balance don't always go hand in hand. See, this theme of growth and becoming stronger is both what makes these games so great, and also why half the content in the battle system is obsolete in competitive play. Because why use an Ivysaur in battle when there's a Venusaur right there? Evolution's a great idea when you're making a game that's all about growth and getting better and better so that you have stronger Pokemon as you get stronger, but at the same time, you're not going to use the lower ones when you're playing at the highest level possible. And you're not going to see any of these weaker Pokemon in any competitive play. Unless you're Smogon, you make another tier called Little Cup where all the unevolved Pokemon get to fight. I love you so much, Smogon. Thank you, Smogon! Or is it Smogon? Have I messed it up this whole time? Oh god. Same thing applies to attacks. Ember is all well and good at the beginning of the game, but Flamethrower is always going to be the better option. Because at the beginning of the game, you're like, haha, I have a small Ember, that's fun. But then as you grow, you see yourself become someone that can use Flamethrower all the time. Growth! Yeah! And this context also applies to other fully evolved Pokemon. A very good example is this fella right here, Beautifly. Kinda like Butterfree, but getting even less respect. But don't worry, I love you, Beautifly, and for a good reason. Back in Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald, Beautifly had an express purpose, specifically evolving quick as hell in the early game. Bug types like Beautifly are super important in the base game because it gives players a Pokemon that evolves quickly, becoming all the way evolved at the ripe age of level 10. And they see that evolution, they're like, whoa. Now this early in the game, a new player already has something with quite a bit of strength, and seeing evolution firsthand is probably blowing their minds as they stare at their Trico with wonder. What will it become one day? That'll drive them forward to keep playing your game. But at the same time, you can't have this Beautifly be as powerful as, let's say, a Dragonite. If that were the case, little Timmy would just use Beautifly the whole game. Even Ash did this exact thing with Butterfree. So good for adventure and game design, but not so good for competitive play. This eliminates quite a few options for your top echelon of rad pokes. But even then, it's still not really that great. Let's look back at VGC 2015, where we had 15 unique Pokemon out of 48 possible slots in the top 8. In 2015, there were 357 fully evolved Pokemon legal at that tournament. Let's be generous and say about 2/3 of the Pokemon there were like Beautifly and ineligible simply because of where they were placed in the story of the game, where you have to grow, and say that 100 of them were viable. Now let's compare that to a game like Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, and the most recent large-scale tournament at the time of writing, Come to Papa 3. Large-scale being kinda relative, but whatever. At the time, they had 78 characters available. The top 48 contained 35 different characters, compared to 15 different Pokemon in VGC 2015 doesn't really bode greatly. And the comparison might not be very fair. After all, on one hand, some people were using multiple characters in Come to Papa 3, but at the same time, you can't use 2 of the same Pokemon on a team, so you're guaranteed at least 6 in Pokemon. Not to mention, balancing is really difficult because, like I said earlier, there's no other game like Pokemon. Sure, you can see its elements in a bunch of different games, like for instance, it's a game that revolves around having teams like your League, Dota, or Overwatch. It's a turn-based game like your Hearthstones. And it's a strategy game where you choose each individual move very carefully, like, well, a lot of strategy games. Pick your favorite. And the main difference between Pokemon and any other game is that 80% of the game happens well before the battle. And then when the battle starts, you have to utilize this setup that you've done in a very deliberate manner. Like, games like Hearthstone, Magic the Gathering, that stuff has stuff where you set up a deck beforehand and you have to work with it. But with that, every single card is a random card draw. With Pokemon, you choose every single move as it happens. In some turn-based strategy games, like one of my personal favorites, Frozen Synapse, has it so that you have to plan out every single deliberate move, but in Pokemon, you have to plot out all sorts of different customizations for each Pokemon, with each individual move, EVs, IVs, abilities, items being held. There's a lot of pre-planning. And then another difference between Frozen Synapse and Pokemon is in Frozen Synapse, it's a game where you choose each and every individual sort of, location. You can choose all these different locations, where they shoot. It's all sorts of different choices. With Pokemon, at least in singles, if you have full health, the maximum number of choices you can make is 9. 4 of those choices being the moves you make, and then 5 being switching out for something else. Now combine these lack of options and the fact that it's a turn-based game, it makes it very easy to read your opponent. But at the same time, this makes for very optimal strategies to rise up to the top. Which is why, there we go, an imbalance, bada bing.
Hey guys, this is your boy Chongo from the future, like while I'm editing it. I listened to this over and I realized I was kinda rambling on this part, so I'm just gonna give a quick bottom line of sorts. So essentially, all of these different elements make it very easy to optimize Pokemon as it is. Now, like I said back at the beginning, the overall goal of competitive play is optimization. Fighting games are easier to balance at a high level than Pokemon because the thing holding back players from being truly optimized and getting a surefire optimized strategy is human reaction times. Turn-based games eliminate the need for reaction times, making them a lot easier to find a more optimal strategy. However, with games like, Magic the Gathering, Hearthstone, you get a random card draw each turn, therefore making it nearly impossible to have a surefire strategy because you could just draw a bunch of cards that don't help you. A turn-based game that has no chance at all is something like chess, where both sides are exactly the same, save for the minor difference of who goes first, and there have been literally books written about the difference between that and that, so I'm not going to talk about that. After giving it a day to marinate, I actually did think of a game that's sort of similar to Pokemon in all of these respects, in that it's turn-based and that, it's different for each thing and there isn't as much random chance, and that's the Civilization series. But even then, something like that doesn't hold a candle, because the difference between nations are just a couple of units that'll only be used during a certain part of the games, and then a few passive abilities that don't do too much, while each individual Pokemon is drastically different. Not to mention you don't have a custom build of Civilization. So since it's both turn-based, and there's just so many differences between every single Pokemon, and the fact that there isn't as much randomness, or at least until the turn of, as you're playing, it's a lot easier to find a specific formula for what the optimal team is. Like a formula of sorts, I don't know if that's a correct phrasing of it, but it's much easier to find, therefore people are going to flock more towards what's objectively best in this quote-unquote formula. Hopefully I'm explaining this pretty well. If not, feel free to ask questions about it in the comments. I'll do what I can to explain it because I've rewritten this part about 20 times and this is the best I've got right now.
So yeah, deuces back to part 4. Let's say you're about to do a Pokemon battle, and someone sends out Galvantula, this fun fellow. Now tell me everything you know about Galvantula. Go. Time's up. Now depending on your skill level, you probably gave different answers of different depths in that very, very short time, unless you paused the video like a cheater. Some of you might have said, alright, it's electric bug. And then some of you more savvy people might have followed it up with, well, that means it's weak to rock and fire, and it resists fighting type, steel type, grass type, and electric type attacks. Some of the even more savvy might mention the fact that it has compound eyes, which means that if it uses Thunder, it's more likely to hit, which is good, because Thunder is usually a pretty low accuracy move. Some of you even more savvy to the competitive Pokemon community knows that it has access to Sticky Web, which is a very, very special tool that can put out a thing that makes it so that if every time you switch in, you lose speed. Very, very helpful move, going to be used on a lot of Galvantulas. Now, knowing all of that takes a lot of knowledge beforehand. Like, just knowing what types are weak against what other types, along with resistances, that needs a whole chart in and of itself. On top of that, knowing that it has compound eyes along with what it does is just something that you kind of have to remember. And that's even more annoying considering the fact it could also have Swarm or Unnerve. Although probably not, Swarm isn't that great of an ability. And then there's Sticky Web, which is like, alright, how do you know that it's got Sticky Web unless you just know a full catalog in your brain which Pokemon has Sticky Web? Now you might be thinking, oh, obviously, it's a spider, of course it's gonna know Sticky Web. Alright, then why does Slurpuff know it? And even without Slurpuff, you have Masquerain, Ribombee, Leavanny, none of those are spiders, but they can learn it. Oh, well, obviously all bug types can learn it. Oh yeah, well, Volcarona can't, Vivillon can't, Crustle can't, Scolipede can't, Parasect can't, my boy Beautifly can't! The point is that this knowledge is very, very segmented in ways that sometimes doesn't make sense. But if you're just getting in competitive Pokemon, odds are you're not gonna have any idea what the heck, and it's gonna be a huge barrier. I say odds are because there's a very good chance that you're still gonna know what's going on because of, let me hit the button, whoop-bat! Pokemon is such a huge part of our culture that, like, almost everyone knows what Pokemon is, and if you're gonna take the game seriously, odds are you played through the game once or twice. And as you're going through the game, you learn about all these mechanics like attack, special attack, flinching, sleeping, burning, paralysis. Heck, by the time I got done playing Sapphire for the first time, I had the whole type chart down pat. So I would argue that if Pokemon didn't have all these games to, you know, let people figure out what the heck's going on, it wouldn't have a competitive scene at all, due to just how deep and complex this battle system is. Not to mention having to know such specific knowledge in terms of who knows what. Now, in the defense of competitive Pokemon, you wouldn't expect a competitive player to know every single move that a Galvantula knows. Like, you're not going to quiz someone and go like, hey, does Galvantula know Screech? The answer is yes, by the way. Because the way that Pokemon is played, with it being so setup-based and it being so optimized on turn-based combat, therefore you have a lot of time to pick the best possible move, they're only going to really need to know the best moves that Galvantula knows, because people are only going to pick the best moves. And there's a little bit of irony when you consider the fact that this game is so based on building different varieties of teams, and yet a lot of them use the same moves. A great resource I've used for this is Pikalytics, where essentially they go in, they look at different tiers, and they show different Pokemon, and they show what percentage the Pokemon's been used, along with what percentage of the time they have certain moves. And you'll see a lot of the time, there's a ton of moves here that are used 70% or more of the time. I'm saying that word a lot. And again, when you're working in a sort of turn-based thing where these numbers are more absolute, obviously the best strategies are going to rise to the top, but I don't know, it's just ironic. And you can drop in different strategies, but when you're playing a game like Pokemon, you want to make sure that you consistently have the best strategy so you can consistently win more. Remember that statement for when I start my dev diary. So yeah, that's my hot take on competitive Pokemon. Like I said earlier, I love competitive Pokemon, and to be honest, I used VGC in some examples, even though like, putting it into double battles makes it very different, but it's still the official playstyle, that's why I used it. Anyway, might talk about my dev diary where I make a game where I'm actually trying to like make a version of this where all these problems are rectified in some way, shape, or form, because a lot of these things wouldn't work if this wasn't Pokemon. But anyway, hopefully I'll make that dev diary. Subscribe for more, yay!